Shalom, my name's Aaron, and welcome to today's discussion on the Torah portion. We're wrestling with the Torah portion Vayishlach, which is Genesis 32 and 30, up to 36. Vayishlach means and he sent, from the verb lishloach, meaning to send. It's where we get the word sent one, a shaliach, from that verb. Anyone who's going on behalf of somebody else and representing them is called a shaliach. In English, that's the word we use for apostle. An apostle in Greek or apostle in English is the shaliach in Hebrew. And this follows on from, of course, last week's Torah portion, where we find our hero Jacob, of which the book of Genesis is mainly concerned about. Half the book of Jacob is actually about half the book of Genesis is actually about Jacob. In last week's Torah portion, Jacob is on his way back from Haran with all of his wives and his children and all of his goods and cattle. He's quite the successful farmer and businessman now. And on his journey, he suddenly encounters angels. In the beginning of chapter 32, he encounters angels. The Torah portion and Jacob actually have a lot to do with angels. He meets them, he's going to talk to them, and in this Torah portion, he even wrestles with one. So we're not told or explained what happens when Jacob encounters these angels at the beginning of 32. But in the beginning of this portion, it says in English, and I'm reading from a New King James, Genesis 32 verse 4 says, "And he commanded them, saying, Speak thus to my Lord." Who's the them? Well, in Hebrew, it says, Vayishlach, and he sent, Yaakov, so Jacob is sending, Malachim lefanav, angels before him. So who is he commanding? Well, the text reads that he's actually commanding angels. So these angels that he has met, he says, "Now you go and talk to my brother for me." And which is exactly what the angels do. They go and speak, and then they return in verse 6. And it says, "Then the messengers returned, the malachim, the messengers or angels returned to Jacob, and they say that your brother Esau is coming to meet you with 400 men." So they give a report, but they don't actually intervene. They don't sort of go and fight for Jacob. They don't sort of defend him. They don't whisper to Esau and say, "Now you be a really nice boy, or we'll get you." Which is an interesting thing. What is the role and responsibility of angels in the Bible and in our tradition? Perhaps that's something we can ponder. But here, this idea of humans having a relationship and an interaction with angelic beings is in the Hebrew Bible, and the Jewish people have a very well developed angelology. So they give angels names, they give angels functions, they give them ranks. It's where we get the idea of archangels, which actually isn't a word that's in the Bible. It's a tradition, and Jesus himself says that in the end, in the future time, in the new world, you will judge angels. Now, when we use the word to judge, lishfot, that does mean judge. It does, like going to court and getting a judgment by a judge, but it also means to rule or a ruler. And the book of Judges is a history, a sacred history of Israel's rulers. They weren't kings; they were the rulers, and they were called the judges. So it doesn't mean that they just judged or ruled in terms of law, but they judged and ruled in terms of government. So here we have Jacob asking. He's afraid. He's nervous that his brother is coming, so he divides his property up, and he sends the women and children first. In verse 7, it says Jacob was greatly afraid. This is actually one of the characteristics, unfortunately, of Jacob. Just about every time we encounter him in the text, he's afraid of something. And yet, when God, in the Psalms particularly, but sometimes in the prophets, God will describe himself as, "I am the God of Jacob." Now, why would God, who's powerful and mighty in the commander of armies, including angelic armies, choose to identify himself with Jacob, who's always afraid? And this actually reveals one of the characteristics of God, that He delights actually to be known through weakness, because when we are weak, He is strong. And so God allows Himself to be called, I am the God of Jacob, even though He's always afraid. He's always weak. He often makes silly mistakes, including being a deceiver. But God says, I can work even with this character. I can work with you. I can work in your weakness. And that's actually one of the great characteristics of God, and as shown through the Hebrew Bible. And so Jacob is afraid, and he divides his group up, and he then ends up sending across the other ones first. But this is what he does. So in verse 7, it says, Jacob was greatly afraid, he's distressed. He divided the people that were with him, the flocks, the herds, the camels, into two companies. And he says, if Esau attacks one, then the other one will escape. So he's making some good plans. Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country and to your family, and I will dwell with you. So God is still present. He hasn't left Jacob. He's been with Jacob in Haran. He's with Jacob at this moment. And Jacob's still afraid, but God is present at this moment, and so Jacob prays. And then he goes and he sends gifts in verse 13. So he lodged there that same night and took what came to his hand as a present for Esau, his brother, which was 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams. And then there's a plethora of camels, etc., etc. And so from this text, the Jewish sages ascertain um, um, the steps you should take before going to war. So the encounter is Esau and Jacob potentially are coming to fight, and the angels are not going to stop this one. It's an interesting thought. And so what does Jacob do? He prepares, he prays, he sends gifts. So this is what the Jewish sages say all people should do when coming into a conflict that may actually lead to open hostilities. You should prepare and make preparations. You should pray about the situation. And you should send gifts to try and calm the situation, and in the end avoid a war. Send a gift, send a present, show that you're actually not wanting war, but instead want peace. So this is a piece of what's called halakha, a piece of looking at the Bible and working out a procedure or a practice or something you should walk out when you're encountering a real life environment. In this case, a real problem, which may actually lead to war. What's really important one of the big important scenes in this Torah portion is where Jacob actually wrestles with God. Although the text it gives us some tensions as to who or what he is wrestling with, because it says in verse 24 of chapter 32 that Jacob was left alone. So he sent out his camp, his company into two groups, and the women and children are going first. How brave is that? Then our hero is now by himself, and he was left alone. And a man, it uses the word ish, a man. Okay? Doesn't say the word angel, doesn't say God, doesn't. Says a man. A man wrestles with him. And until the breaking of day. Doesn't say why, doesn't say how this happened, doesn't give you a discussion ahead of time. There's no challenge. It's quite strange where just suddenly there's a clash and people are wrestling. And then one doesn't prevail against the other, which is an interesting thing. And then as the sun begins to rise, this being dislocates the socket of Jacob's hip and puts it out of joint. And then you get this interesting discussion. They actually start talking. So the man, the unnamed person who's wrestling with Jacob, says, let me go because the day breaks. I mean, we don't know why, if the daylight is different from the nighttime, and why this encounter is happening. Is it actually a dream sequence? actually really happening. And it seems to imply that it's actually really happening. And Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me and you give me a blessing. Jacob seems to know that this character is not or is more than a man. And so the being asks, what is your name? Which is an interesting thing to ask because uh, God would already know your name, right? Or an angel would too, for that matter. So a complete stranger might not. But if we suspect this character is more than who they are, then this is an interesting question. And he uses the word, I'm Jacob. But your name will no longer be Jacob. I'm going to change it. You'll be called Israel. And you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Well, that's interesting. What does it mean to prevail here? Have you beaten this character? Well, yes and no. I mean, no, you haven't physically beaten him, but you've drawn him to a draw, and perhaps that is the actual prevailing that's going on here. The name Israel is a very interesting name. Sometimes people want to know what does it actually mean in Hebrew, Yisrael. Um, the in Hebrew, we're told like, what is your name? And he says, look, my name is Yaakov. And but now you'll be called Yisrael ki sarit im Elohim, because you wrestled sarit im Elohim. And so Israel contains the letter Shin and Resh, which is the word for struggle. So El means God, and Yisra can mean he struggles with God. So that could be one name, one meaning of the name Israel. Yashar, which is also the same word, also means straight. So Yisrael can also mean straight with God. So it can mean implying you wrestle with the Lord, and while wrestling, while coming to grips with the Bible, while coming to grips with the theology, while coming to grips with all the wonderful things that God has done through sacred history, through the history of the universe, you then become straight, upright. You become a better person. Your walk with the Lord is actually making you a better person from day to day to day. God is becoming more of a king of your life than he was yesterday. And so both those aspects of his name would actually hold true in this case. And then God blesses this place. And he actually says, look, I've actually seen God face to face. Well, how can that possibly work? And so for many Christian commentators, we look at this as a theophany. We often try and look at it sort of a pre-incarnate figure of Jesus. Although the Hebrew just gives the tension. They just leave you with tension. They don't try and answer questions because there's too many questions that are unanswered. The text says he saw a man. Jacob says he implies he actually saw God. Well, that can't physically happen. If he's actually fighting God, why doesn't God just beat him? There's no possible way that a human could actually out-wrestle the Lord. Not possible. So there seems to be much more than that. There's tension in the text. You also get this idea of the name change, that he who wrestles with God ends up being a straighter and a better person, a person who delves into the text and wants more from it, wants to look like God more, even though we're often afraid, even though we do dumb things, we don't always make the right decisions, even though that and sometimes our walk with God is not perfect, not always upright. And yet God chooses to identify in our weakness and to be there with us, making us stronger because we're now relying on his strength. There's so much in the text that just shines forth. In the end, Jacob and Esau don't fight. In the end, they're reconciled. Now, many times especially in modern history, people look at the modern Middle Eastern conflict and they go, this is just like Isaac and Ishmael are always fighting, and Jacob and Esau are always fighting. Biblically, Isaac and Ishmael reconcile. They both show up to bury Abraham, their father. They don't become mortal enemies. Jacob and Esau reconcile, and they hug and they kiss and they go their separate ways after blessing each other. But they don't fight. That's this sort of idea that we're always going to be eternally at war is not true. Biblically, we want to pursue for peace. Biblically, we can find peace, and biblically, we should work towards peace. Whereas Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And what I think is often missed in this Torah portion, or missed perhaps in many of our big biblical studies, which occurs in this Torah portion, is the incident with Dinah, the only daughter of Jacob. And so in chapter 34, we encounter the incident with Dinah. Dinah is the feminine form of the word Dan or Daniel. It comes from the verb ladun, which means to judge. So Daniel means God is my judge. It's another word for judge, like lishvot. But it's also the word where you get the word diyun from, which is the word for, in Hebrew, to discuss. A diyun is a discussion. And so it's often within a discussion that you actually might end up making a judgment. But it's in the discussion that information is shared and wrestled with that might influence a discussion. But Dinah is the feminine form of Dan, and she is the only daughter of Jacob. However, the text starts in Genesis 34 by saying, "Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah." Now let's remember that in the ancient world, we didn't read the Bible, we didn't have our own personal copies, so we're actually having to hear it. So we hear that Dinah is the daughter of Leah. She gets a designation. She's out of all the women that Jacob has, this one produces Dinah, and whom she bore to Jacob, and went out to see the daughters of the land. In Hebrew, it says, "Vaytetze Dinah," and Dinah went out. So when you hear the word "and Dinah went out," you start asking the question, where did she go out from? What did she go out to? She went out to see the daughters of the land, right? So what did she go out from? The text is unclear, and it's very, very open for some interpretation. Why is she not chaperoned? Is there a problem within the family? Are there tensions within the family of these four women and lots of different kids from lots of different women that Dinah can't handle the home environment, so she leaves it. She leaves it. She leaves its protection, but she also might leave its stress. She goes out to be with the daughters of the land. At this point in time, the daughters of the land must surely be pagans. So this is not a good thing, right? She's gone out. The first sentence screams trouble. Why did she leave? Why is she not chaperoned? Was she forced out? Is this an act of rebellion? And she goes to be with non-believers. This can only go poorly. And in verse 2 of chapter 34, "And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of that country, saw her, he took with her, lay with her, violated her." Verse 2 is horrible. We have a massive indecency, a violation of this poor woman. And the name of the guy, Shechem ben Hamor. In Hebrew, he's Shechem, son of a donkey. That's what ben Hamor means. It really is insulting. If you heard it, you'd go, wow, who is this evil character? Whose dad's called a donkey? He's obviously not a nice person. He's violated this girl. There's no real way to make verse 2 in any way sound good. It's a bad verse. Verse 3, the next sentence is actually very interesting. It says his soul strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. There's a switch. She's now no longer the daughter of Leah. She's now the daughter of Jacob. She's come back under his protection. She wasn't before. And what's interesting is the way that the Hebrew describes now how Shechem feels to her. He doesn't just love her. It doesn't say and Shechem loved Dinah. He fell in love with her. She was absolutely beautiful. and so he wants her as a bride. It says his soul, his nefesh, okay, is attracted to her, and the verb is the verb to say like he's like bonded to her like glue, okay, like he's so attracted to her. His soul, not just his heart, which means he is now in the act of converting, right? If you're Jewish and you're hearing these things, Shechem is now wanting to become part of the people of God. He doesn't just want to marry her and take the girl for him, come and join my people, but we're going to join your people. So what's going on? You've got some horrible experience. Verses 1 and 2 describe something not good, and that we're not 100% sure what was wrong, but it wasn't good. But now something's changed. There's within the mess, redemption is coming. And one of those redemptions could be that the people of Shechem are actually going to, which is modern day Nablus, by the way, the people of Shechem might actually want to become part of the people of God. Does that actually happen? No. The story, unfortunately, goes, while there was a little brief moment of light, goes bad. So Shechem speaks to his father, Hamor, the donkey, and says, I need this woman. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah and his daughter. Doesn't say how he heard. Doesn't say whether there was a conversation between the parents. It could have been. But none of that is made. And there's no response yet from Jacob. He makes no response yet. But his sons, who were with the livestock in the field, this amazing success story of livestock that he's got, the kids were taking care. So Jacob held his peace until they came. And then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob came in from the field, and when they heard it, the men were grieved. They were very angry because they had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son wants to be with you and your daughter. Please allow them to get married. And then there's the trick. Okay, you are the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, trick the people of Nablus to get circumcised, to join their people. Now, if the people of Nablus are getting circumcised, what are they doing? They are converting. They are becoming Jews. They are on their way to becoming the people of God. If Simeon and Levi hadn't snuck in the night and stabbed everybody, then the first conquest, so to speak, of the land of Canaan would have been now, and it would have been, apart from the first violation, a peaceful one. The people of God would have grown. There wouldn't just been the 12 sons, it would have been the 12 sons in this entire town, and the monotheism would have flourished. So this is an incredible part of the story that's sort of sometimes missed. And instead you get the incident of Simeon and Levi, who do something completely wrong, and where there wasn't a moment of redemption. There was an opportunity for a new people to actually join. And no one asked Dinah, by the way. No one actually sat down and said, Dinah, would you like to be a princess? Because this prince wants to marry you. You could actually be a princess. Can't think of a better husband. All your kids are going to be well cared for from now on. They're going to have the best education, the best clothes, the best food. They're going to live in the best house. We live in a tent. You're going to have everything. No one asks Dinah what she wants. She's almost like a forgotten character at this stage. And instead, like her name, people enter into the wrong judgment. Okay, Dinah, her name is to judge, and Simeon and Levi make a wrong judgment in this case. And they judge the people of Nablus, the people of Shechem, and kill them all. And Jacob's going to be furious with them. And in the end of the blessings, when we get to Genesis 49, we'll see what Jacob does when he blesses these kids. Simeon ends up being a bad seed. He ends up, in terms of biblical territory, his allotment is down in the south, It's near Beersheba. It's completely surrounded by Judah. A lot of people forget that. They think he's up north, like the 10 lost tribes. There's not 10 up there. There's only 9, actually. Judah and Benjamin are in the south, and there's a third tribe in the south. It's Simeon, and he just gets absorbed by Judah. He never produces a prophet. He never produces a king. He doesn't produce a judge. He's just a character that never quite gets on board with the people of God. But Levi, the other character who's involved in this story and this horrible incident, and even though he goes out and he murders lots of people, his descendants do get on board with the plans of God. They do repent, and there is restoration, and they become the Levites. They will produce Moses and Aaron. They will produce the worship leaders. They will produce the priests, and they will be an active part of the worship life and prayer life of the Jewish people. So there's lots in this Torah portion, and a lot of it actually has to do with angels, which in Jewish tradition are everywhere. There, ever since Jacob has had his dream of the ladder, where there's angels ascending and descending, that this idea that the angelic life is amongst us, that sometimes we entertain angels unawares. They're around, and we can interact with them, and in some cases even ask them to do things like Jacob did. He sends them, but they also have limits. They weren't there to fight for Jacob and kill Esau. There was a reconciliation that was actually meant to happen. And Jacob prepared, prayed, and sent peace offerings. This is the thing that we're meant to do before the last resort, which would be war. Something we would all always long to avoid at all costs. But in the end, also, we have to wrestle with God, and we have to wrestle as individuals, alone, all by ourselves, where it's just us and God. And in that mystery of wrestling and trying to gain a deeper appreciation of who God is, we're also learning something about ourselves, where we become more righteous and more straight, thanks to Him and His Spirit and His mercy. And so all of these themes show up this week in the Torah portion for us to contemplate, to wrestle with, to discuss, and to grow in all of our faith. Thanks very much for listening. Look forward to being with you again next week, where we go and continue on the stories and adventures of Jacob, our patriarch.